All right, we are delighted to have you with us this morning. Though our crowd is a little short right now, we're glad that you're here, and we commend you for your interest in the study of the Bible, and particularly in the theme that we have this quarter, love and marriage. It is a very vital theme, and we appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and study it together so we can improve our marriages. Not everyone wants to be married. Not everyone needs to be married. But if someone needs to and wants to be married, that's good. God ordained the marriage relationship. He provided it for the good of mankind, so it's fine to be married. But sometimes folks are not wanting to or needing to, and you can go to heaven without being married. If you remain moral and true to the book, you can go to heaven if you're married or not. But if we're married, we want to have good marriages. We want them to be what God wants them to be. And as a beginning point, let's read Hebrews chapter 13, verses 3 and 4. Remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Now in verse 3, he's talking about one kind of bondage, and in verse 4, it's another kind. I don't believe that it's talking about the same kind of bondage. In verse 3, he talks about maybe bondage in suffering, bondage in sin. A person can be held within the bonds of sin, or he can be in prison in bondage. But in verse 4, he mentions specifically one kind of bondage, for marriage is honorable in all. Now, I believe that we can speak of entering into the bonds of matrimony. We often use that expression of being at the point at which you tie the bond or tying the bond. That's referring to the marriage relationship, and I believe that it is a good scriptural description of marriage. So we talk about the bonds of matrimony. Now, we've been using some analogies to talk about various aspects of the marriage relationship. You remember we talked about the building blocks and the cement of marriage. The blocks that are necessary to build a good marriage and the cement that will hold them together. And we refer to biblical passages and principles that will affect that, and we'll be talking about building and cement in those verses. Now, I want to use another analogy today. We'll be making that analogy between a rope and marriage, between a strong rope and a strong marriage. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 12, Solomon said, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. I don't know if you've ever particularly noticed that, but it's a good principle. That's our basic text for today. Now, I broke this the other day. Sherry gave me some things to use as an illustration. Now, it's pretty tough, but I broke it. But it's just one cord, you see. Now, if I had several cords together, I couldn't have broken it. I don't believe I would be able to. I don't think anybody here can. The more fibers you have in that rope, the stronger it is. More difficult it would be to break that bond. Now, I'd like to suggest that strong ropes do not just happen. If you find a rope somewhere, you can assume that someone has made that rope. The dictionary defines a rope as a thick, strong cord made of intertwisted strands of fiber. That means a rope is one that has been put together. You take several fibers or strands of some material and put them together. That makes a stronger rope. And that's the idea that I want to set before you today. A building block is strong and the cement is strong, but this is another analogy. We're talking about a marriage made with fibers, strands of leather, or some other material. Now, strong marriages are not just happening by itself or themselves. When you find a strong marriage, you know that somebody has worked on it. Somebody has put forth some effort to make it a strong marriage. Just as when you find a rope, you know that someone has made it. They put several strands of materials together to make that strong rope. Now, there was a story some years ago about a lady who had trouble breathing, and She was very weak. She went to the doctor, and he checked her over carefully and said, you have some heart trouble, and you need to take it easy. Don't be placing any stress on your heart. In fact, I don't want you climbing any stairs. She said, Doc, I live on the 3rd floor of my apartment building. How am I going to get up to my apartment if I don't climb up the stairs? He said, I don't know, but you need to do something. If you climb stairs, you might place too much stress on your heart. You might have a heart attack and die. Come back in a month and let me see how you're doing. So she came back in a month. He checked her over and said, now you're doing much better. Your heart is in much better shape. She said, does that mean that I can go back to climbing up the stairs to my apartment? He said, yes, I don't see why you can't. She said, well, I'm glad of that. Climbing up that drain pipe to my apartment every week about wore me out. Well, that suggests that she did something about the problem. She needed to get to that apartment. She worked on some plan to get there. It might not have been the best plan, but she got there. Now, there was a story about a 94-year-old woman who thought it was time for her to go into a rest home, assisted living home. Her family thought it would be best, so they moved her into that apartment. She was on about the 2nd floor. They moved everything in, got her set up, visited with her a while, and then they decided to leave her so she can begin to get used to it. And she went down to the common area where the tables were and where people ate and played games together and had fellowship together. And she saw an elderly gentleman sitting over by the wall, and she went back and sat down beside him and said, how old are you? He said, I'm 95. She said, you know, you look just like my 4th husband. He said, well, how many husbands have you had? She said, 3. Now, if we want to do something, we can find a way to do it. She apparently was wanting to get married again, and she was taking the steps to do that. Now, I'm suggesting that if you find a good marriage, it didn't just happen accidentally. It happened because somebody put forth the effort and did the things that were necessary to have a good marriage. So that's what we want to talk about today. I'd like to suggest some fibers or strands to go into this marriage rope in the bonds of matrimony. First of all, we mentioned the religious fiber. Now, this is vitally important, as all of us know. In anything you do, you need to submit to the will of God, and that's true, of course, in marriage. In Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, Solomon said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Now, the word duty there in the King James Version is in italics. That means it was not in the original text. The translators placed it there. He is really saying this is the whole of man. This is what life is all about. Our existence here is to bring glory and honor to God. This is the whole of man. And then in Matthew 6:33, Jesus said in the New Testament, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So we'll have the material things of life that we need, which is in the context, if we seek God and His commandments, His will, as we ought. Now, careful studies have confirmed the fact that religion has a great deal to do with a good marriage. Religious convictions will give a couple the things that are needed to make a good marriage. So we need to go back to the Bible, learn what God has to say about it. The Bible is really the blueprint for a good marriage. And if we put these things into practice, then we can make a good, strong marriage. I have known more than one home that might have fallen apart if it had not been for the efforts on the part of husband and wife and the fact that they were trying to be Christians, and that kept it together. It'll do it for everyone. If we submit to the will of God, it will make us better individually, and it will strengthen a marriage. Now, Professors Burgess and Cottrell, some psychologists, studied hundreds of marriages in an effort to find what facts led to an enduring marriage. What caused these people to be able to stay together? And they studied 4,000 marriages and found that 25% of them at that time had divorce. And of that 25%, they found that 4 out of every 5 had absolutely no religious connection. They didn't go to church at all together. They didn't have any religious principles to guide them. 4 out of every 5 divorces happen, no doubt, because they did not have any religious convictions upon which they based their marriage. Professors Landis and Landis, a husband and wife team, studied over 4,000 marriages. They found that the same thing was true. Marriages don't stay together if people do not base it upon the will of God, the teachings of the Bible. Deep commitment to one another in the home, in the relationship in the home, must rest upon a solid foundation. Now, if we build our marriages upon the philosophies of men, it'd be like building a house on the sand. It won't work. But when you build that home upon the principles of the Bible, then it's like building it upon a rock. It has a good foundation, and it will stand. When one is deeply committed to the teachings of Christ, he's going to have certain attitudes that are taught in Christianity. And he will have a behavior pattern based upon the Bible. His attitudes and his behavior will give that marriage a foundation upon which to build that marriage. And so we must build our homes upon the religious values. And if we do that, we're going to find that it will likely stay together. Now, there's some other problems that might cause it to fall. You might have one of those fibers in this rope, and it might break. But generally speaking, the religious fibers will give you a foundation that will enable that marriage to hold up through all the years. You remember in Matthew 19, verse 3, some Pharisees came to Jesus asking this question: is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Beginning with verse 4, we read, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So if we build our homes upon the will of God, we're going to pay attention to that. God made two people one in marriage when it's the right kind of marriage, and man is not to part that marriage. Let no man put it apart. So there's a relationship in marriage that will enable us to stay together and have a good, happy marriage. And it gives us the fidelity and the religious convictions that will enable us to stay together and be happy. I would also like to emphasize the fact that people need to build upon unity in the home in regard to religion. If a person is a member of the New Testament church and marries someone who is a member of a church that man has established, they're going to have differences. It's going to be difficult for them to be in harmony. And so it is important to make sure that we are Christians and that we marry someone who is a Christian, a New Testament Christian, one who does what the Bible teaches them to do. So we need to build it upon the unity of conviction in religion. Some years ago, studies showed that when 10 members of the church married someone who was not a member of the New Testament church, 7 out of the 10 were lost to the church. Now think about that. Out of every 10 Christians who married out of the church, 10 failed in their marriages. That's because they were not together and unified in the Bible or on the Bible, on the principles of the Bible. So from marriages that were made on Christian college campuses about that same time, they found that there was but one divorce for every 800 marriages. Now, I don't think it would be that good today because we have so many who are not members of the church going to our colleges, and our young people in Christian colleges often marry those who are not Christians. But now, it's hard to believe that, but that's the statistic that we heard years ago. Among those who met on Christian college campuses and formed a marriage, there was but one divorce for every 800 marriages. That says a great deal about putting the religious fiber into this rope. So let's think about that. We're going to put the religious fiber into that marriage. And then number 2, there's a fiber of commitment. In Matthew 19, verse 6, remember that Jesus said, wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. And he teaches us that we're not to part. Stay together. That's commitment. And those who marry need to commit themselves to obey the will of God in that regard. Stay together. If we have a right to be married, we need to marry and stay together. A strong commitment to the teachings of Christ means a strong commitment to the marriage itself. We're going to do what God said if we're Christians. And in marriage, we're going to stay together because that's what Jesus said to do. Nothing is more weakening to a marriage than a lack of commitment when we get married. When people marry and they don't have a real commitment to stay together, that marriage is not going to make it. Remember I told you about that young lady who received a scholarship for college, and she decided to get married. And she went to the authorities at the school and said, now I have this scholarship, but I'm going to get married. Now, if my marriage doesn't work out, can I still get that scholarship? How long do you think that marriage will last? It wouldn't last very long because she was not going into that marriage with a commitment to stay married until death. So there must be a commitment if that marriage is going to stay together. Now, if you stay together only until difficulties come, it's going to fail because difficulties will come. I can tell you, difficulties will come, some more serious than others. There will be difficulties. If some man tells you, I've been married for 40 years and we've never had a disagreement, you better watch that man. He'll lie about other things as well. I don't believe that any two people can live together 40 years and never had a disagreement. It may not be a serious thing, but you're going to have some difficulties, some disagreements. Well, you have to work at it. When difficulties come, you can overcome them. You have biblical principles that will help you overcome those difficulties, and you can stay together when both are willing to obey the will of God. When you take such vows, you're either making a sacred commitment to God and before God, or you are just saying some things in order to be married because that's what they say in marriage ceremonies. If we don't really mean it, we're really being hypocritical in what we say when we say we'll do it. We'll stay together until death, but we mean only until problems come. If you do not regard these words as sacred, then you're just being hypocritical in what you say then. Yes, sir.
Young generations have not taken it serious enough that when they get ready to get married, they're not making that covenant with God. And it's not so much as what you're willing to do with that partner, it's what you're willing to do with God. Because the covenant is between you and God and the other person. And the other person has that covenant with God and themselves and the person they're married. So it's like you're saying with the rope. That becomes 3 parts of that rope.
Right. It's a covenant between a man and a woman and God.
Yes.
And many people in the world today are in this culture of today. They're not concerned about what God says, about anything. And so when they marry without a conviction, religious conviction, that they must obey God's will, that marriage is not going to make it. That's why you have so many divorces today. And we pointed out the fact that divorces have lessened. We don't have as many people getting divorces today, but it's not because they're doing better in the marriages, it's because they're not getting married. They don't get married, so they don't have to get a divorce. Commitment is for life. Genesis 2:24, God said, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And we say in our marriage vows, till death do us part. It says binding and long lasting as the Lord's love for the church. How much did the Lord love the church? Enough to die for it. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Now, and every day and every night companionship, where our masks are taken away and we are really honest with each other, you can have a good marriage. If it's based upon the will of God, you have a commitment. You're going to stay together even if there are problems. We'll just overcome the problems and still live together. Now, we may know another's personality, his weaknesses and strengths, but knowledge alone is not enough. It takes more than knowledge when you get married. because there are going to be some things you don't know until after you get married. And it's those things that you learn after you get married that determine how strong that marriage will be. We finally come to the point that knowledge is incomplete, and you have to base that marriage on faith and trust and commitment. Now, if there are any young ladies listening to me today, may I say that you will see in courtship some things, and you will see even more things after you get married. When a couple gets married, she may not know how that young man will look after that first night. You know, he may get up in the morning, his hair is in all directions, looking like it needs an oil change, and his teeth are not brushed, his hair is not combed, he's unshaven. Now, when you see that young man at that point, you may wonder, did I make a mistake here? There are going to be a lot of other things like that that you see after marriage that you didn't see before marriage, in his attitude, actions, and so on. He's putting up a good front when he gets married, you know. He wants to look his best and be his best in order to catch that person. And then if there are any boys listening to me, let me say you don't know how she looks before she puts on her oil paint and all that stuff, fixes up her hair. I heard about a young couple that got married, and the first day, the lady got up early and had her hair all wrapped up on those rollers that look like corn cobs, you know. And when he got up and saw her, he said, "What did you do with your hair?" She said, "I set it." He said, "When does it go off?" We learn some things after we marry that we don't know before we marry. And so we need to commit ourselves to stay together with that person, even if we learn some things later that we'd rather not be there. But we need to realize when we make a commitment, and we need to base the marriage upon that commitment. Let's put another fiber in that rope, and it'll be stronger than it was with just one. Then number 3, there's a fiber of commitment and the fiber of honesty. You're honest in what you say to that girl, what you say before God and other people. You are honest. No fiber of the marriage bond is more important than plain old-fashioned honesty. When two people get married, if they're really honest with each other, then that will add strength to the marriage. But if they're dishonest, that marriage is going to fall apart. The meaning of commitment is that I'm going to stay with this person no matter what comes. And if you're honest in that, you're going to work at it. If things don't work out as you would like, you continue to work. You continue to do what you want to do because that's what God wants you to do. And you make a good marriage. Honesty means fidelity to each other, faithfulness to each other in every way. It means forsaking all others and keeping yourself to that one to whom you have pledged your faith. The moment the marriage tie is tied together, each one has less rope than before. Now, when you tie the knot, you have less rope. Before you get married, you have more rope, more freedoms. You may go with someone else and this and that, and then when you become engaged with this person, that begins to shorten the rope. And when you tie that knot, you know your rope is shorter than ever before. It means forsaking all others and keep yourself to that one until death. Honesty means that we're going to be truthful in both life and in words. Communication is difficult when you're honest with each other. But if you're not honest with each other, it is even more difficult. You won't be able to communicate. I have pointed out the fact that marriage counselors, I think across the board, virtually everyone will say that the number one problem when people come to see them because of problems in marriage is communication problems. Number one is communication. I can tell you that's true from my experience in counseling with couples in trouble. They have problems with communication. Now, there's a story that used to make the rounds in our church bulletins, and finally it got into the one that is made from Brother Allen Webster. What's that paper called? House to House and Heart to Heart. I cut out a little story from that paper. When different ones use it, they changed it just a little bit. A lady wanted to divorce her husband, so she filed for divorce. And she had to go before the judge, And he thought he would find out why she wanted to get a divorce. Maybe he could encourage her to stay in that marriage. And so he said, do you have any grounds? And she said, yeah, we have about 3/4 of an acre out here in the country. He said, no, let me ask it another way. Do you have a garage? She said, no, we don't have a garage, but we have a 2-car carport. And then he said, does he ever beat you up? She says, no, I get up an hour before that lazy thing every morning. He was frustrated about this time. He said, lady, why do you want to divorce your husband? She said, because he's just like you. You can't carry on an intelligent conversation with him. Well, that illustrates the fact that we have to be together, work together, be honest with each other, but sometimes people are not honest with each other. In Matthew 7 and verse 12, Jesus sets forth a principle that will help solve that problem. Therefore, all things you would that men should do unto you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Well, in Proverbs 12:22, Solomon said, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. God wants us to be honest. Lying lips are an abomination to him. In Luke 16 and 10, Jesus said, he that is unfaithful in the least is also unfaithful in that which is much. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And so if we're honest, we'll be honest all the way through. And God hates dishonesty. And if a husband and wife are honest with each other, they can overcome most of their problems. If we want to do what God said do. Husbands, read it like this. As I would have my wife treat me, I will do unto her likewise. Wives, make it read like this. As I would have my husband do unto me, I will do unto him likewise. You know, if we did that, if we have that attitude, we'll treat our mate as we want to be treated, and that'll solve virtually every problem we have. One writer has suggested that we add these words to the marriage bond. I bind myself to thee for life, having chosen as I pleased. I will spend the rest of my life trying to please whom I have chosen. That ought to be added to it. We ought to be honest in our vows when we get married. And so we need to add that fiber of honesty. You know, every time you add another fiber to that rope, it makes it stronger, more difficult to break. And then number 4, there's the fiber of reality. Somebody says love is blind, but marriage is an eye-opener. And that's true. You may not see some things when you get married. And some people are blind as a bat when they get married. They want to get married, they want to marry this particular person, and they cannot see some things. And sometimes those of us who are on the other end of that thing put on our mask, and we put on our good behavior, and we want to put the best foot forward and let them see that. But sometimes it changes later. When young people are looking for a marriage partner, they tend to be unrealistic themselves. They're unrealistic about themselves. They present the best to the other partner that they can present, and the other person does the same thing. So we're not really realistic with each other. For example, tries to convince herself that that young man she has married is like the athletic hero. He's the quarterback of the football team, and she thinks he is as handsome as a man in Hollywood. He's as gallant as Sir Walter Raleigh, and as successful in business as Elon Musk. She pictures him that way. She wants to marry that fella. But then after she gets married, she finds out that he doesn't really measure up to all of those things. So sometimes we're not realistic with each other. Not only do we fail to see the other person for what he is, we put on our masks. We pretend to be a certain type of person because we know that's what she wants to marry. After marriage, they try to keep up this play acting, but then after a while, the real self shows through. In courtship, we may present a certain picture, but later after we get married, the real self shows through. I read about a woman who lost her husband in death, and she found that she only had one good picture of her husband. And she took the picture to a photo shop and asked him if he could remove some of the imperfections. What do they call that? Photoshopping? dress the thing up to look better. And she said to the clerk, "You see that wart on his cheek? Could you remove that wart?" He said, "Yes, I think we can." She says, "He has a mustache in that picture, and I never did like that mustache. Could you remove that mustache in this picture?" He said, "Yes, I think we can do that." She said, "He has a hat on there, and I would like to see him without a hat in a picture. Can you take off the hat?" He said, "I think we can." But he said, "Tell me, did he part his hair on the right-hand side or the left-hand side?" She said, "I can't really remember, but when you take his hat off, you can tell, can't you?" Some of you catch up with that later, you know. When he takes the hat off by just removing it with a brush of some sort, that's not going to change things, you know. We have to be real with each other as we really are, and not just put a picture on for them to see of the finest person, the best looking, the richest person, but we really need to see each other as we are. Dr. Rule Howell has well said, "Only persons can relate, masks cannot." He also said, "Marriage is like living in a house with windows. Windows let in the light. Occasionally, we must wash the windows in order that the sunshine may shine in. Likewise, in marriage, we have to wash the windows inside and out so that we can see each other, talk to each other, live for each other, and in the end, love each other." We need to wash those windows inside and out and see each other as we really are. And that's the mark of maturity, when we can see each other as we really are and still love each other. And if we have that love of which we spoke, we'll be able to do that. Accept each other as we are. And then number 5, there is the fiber of love. This is vital. It is essential to have a good marriage. People ought not to get married unless they really love each other. There are many fibers that go into this marriage rope. Love is the one that'll still be holding strong when the others may break. This is the one fiber that will hold when the other fibers are broken. In 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7, Paul describes the behavior of love. And if a husband and wife have the kind of love that Paul described there, that marriage will stay together. And the strength of that love fiber will give strength to the other fibers, and they'll all hold together. When a husband and wife have been unfaithful or untruthful or dishonest in some other way with their mate, the one who has been wronged must forgive the other, and it is love that will enable them to forgive and then to redeem that person. I read about one man who said, "I did something wrong recently and my wife became historical." And somebody said, "You mean hysterical, don't you?" No, he says historical. She brings up everything I've ever done in my history in the past. We don't need to be historical or hysterical, but we need to have love for our mate, and when that person repents, forgive that person and remove it. One man and his wife were having trouble. He had done something wrong, and she was really laying down the law to him. He said, "I thought you had forgiven and forgotten." She says, "I have, but I want you to remember that I have forgiven and forgotten it." That's not really forgiving and forgetting it. We need to wipe the slate clean, and love is the power that will enable us to do that. In Ephesians 5:22 and 23, Paul said, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church." And then in verse 25, he said, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church." Love will help us remove those failures and forgive and forget. In Titus 2 and verse 4, Paul says the older women must teach the younger women to love their husbands. It is love that enables a woman to forgive her husband and to treat him as she ought to treat him. It is not difficult for a woman to love her husband and treat him in the right way if the husband loves his wife as Christ loved the church. How much did Christ love the church? Enough to die for it. He still loves the church. He still loves all of his people. And if a husband loves his wife as Christ loved the church, then it will be easy for her to submit herself to her husband. It is love that makes possible that patience. It helps children to know what love is. When a husband loves his wife and the wife loves her husband, the children are going to learn what love is. And it will be easy for them to submit to the parents. The Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long on the earth. It would be easy for children to learn what love is if mom and daddy love each other. And it is easy for that love to make the right kind of marriage in every way. It is love that makes possible patience on the part of parents with their children. If mom and dad love each other, they're going to love their children. And they will be patient with their children. Teach them properly. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and in the admonition of the Lord. And so we need to have that love in our marriages. Husbands and wives love each other. And it'll teach children to love each other and to love their parents and obey their parents. Love is the fiber that holds after every other strand may have been broken. After beauty has faded, after a man's strength may have abated, it is love that still holds that marriage together. Americans live in a culture today that is dominated by success and by worshiping people who are successful. The best athlete, best musician, the best in this and that, and we look up to them. But really, in marriage, we need to love our mate, even if they're not the best looking, the richest, and not all these other good things we thought we saw in that person. We must love them. Mature, genuine love when some of those things have disappeared. Now, sometimes a good-looking wife, beautiful wife, as she grows older, may lose some of that beauty, but a man must still love her. He may lose some of that strength that he had when he was younger. He may not be able to get out there and push that more like he used to, but we have to love each other, even though the beauty might have faded away, and even though the strength of that man may have abated. Thomas Moore was an Irish poet, born in Dublin, more than 200 years ago. He was a well-known man. He wrote songs. He did a lot of writing. And he married a beautiful woman named Betsy Dyke. And she recognized the fact that her husband loved her, but she felt that she was beautiful, and if she lost that beauty, he might not love her anymore. There came a time when he had to go to America and leave her behind in Ireland for a while. And while he was in America, she contracted the disease of smallpox, and he left her face covered with ugly scars. She was afraid that he would not love her anymore when he got home and saw those ugly scars on her face. A mutual friend of theirs knew her fears and wrote to or contacted the husband by phone or telegraph, possibly at that time, and he told the husband of her fears. She's afraid that he would not love her because of those ugly scars on her face. And then he wrote a message to her, wrote a poem, and sent it to her. He said, "Believe me, if all those endearing young charms which I gaze on so fondly today were to change by tomorrow and fleet in my arms like fairy gifts fading away, thou wouldst still be adored as this moment thou art. Let thy loveliness fade as it will, and around the dear ruin each wish of my heart will entwine itself verdantly still." Now, we wouldn't use that language. We'd just say, "We love you. I love you." And that's what that father or husband was saying to his wife. Even though she was afraid he wouldn't love her anymore, he was telling her that if her beauty has faded, he will still love her. That's the kind of love we need to have in marriage. It ought not to be based just on good looks or how much money he has. We ought just love that person regardless. Happy families realize that love is not self-sustaining. You have to feed it, water it regularly. If you plant a flower in your garden or in your yard, you can't just go off and forget it. You have to water it. You have to put fertilizer on it. You have to care for it. That's the way it is with love in a family. We must love each other. Feed it every day. Practice love every day. It must be fed and renewed constantly. Loving concern in marriage means that each partner tries to make the other one happy. That's what Jesus meant in Matthew 7 and verse 12. If we have that kind of love in our homes, we'll be able to stay together. The greater the number of fibers entwined together, the stronger it will be. Now, we have mentioned 5 fibers that we need to put into our marriage. The fiber of religion, the fiber of commitment, the fiber of honesty, the fiber of reality, and the fiber of love. Now, if you put all of those strands together, it would be more difficult to break. I can't break it. Now, I broke one of these the other day when there was just one, pulled it apart, but I had to really put myself into it. But you know, I can't break these when there are 5 together. I doubt that anyone here can break all 5 of them together. There's some other fibers that you can put into it and make it even stronger. But the 5 that we have mentioned will make a good marriage, strong marriage. And if you have those fibers in your marriage, it's going to work. It's going to stay together. I cut something out of a bulletin one time. I forgot where it was. And I think it fits this lesson. The bonds of matrimony are a good investment only when the interest is kept up. Let that sink in now. Many girls like to marry a military man. He can cook, sew, make beds, is in good health, and he's already used to taking orders. That might help a marriage as well. On anniversaries, the wise husband will always forget the past, but not the present. Don't forget that anniversary present. Too many couples marry for better or for worse, but not for good. We've tried to emphasize in the lesson today, we need to marry for good from now on. Too many couples marry for better or for worse, but not for good. And then when a man marries a woman, they become one. But the trouble starts when they try to decide which one. But if we obey Matthew 7 and 12, put that other one first, we're going to have a good marriage. Now, I've mentioned the passage that Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. Let's read it again from a modern speech translation as we close. The Phillips translation. Some of the modern translations tend to put it in the language that we understand a little better. This love of which I speak is slow to lose patience. It looks for a way of being constructive. It is not possessive. It is neither anxious to impress, nor does it cherish inflated ideas of its own importance, not filled with pride. Love has good manners and does not pursue selfish advantage. It is not touchy. It does not keep account of evil. And let me emphasize the fact that's what we were talking about a while ago. If we forgive, we don't keep a list of all the things he's done wrong or she's done wrong. It does not keep account of evil or gloat over the wickedness of other people. On the contrary, it is glad with all good men when truth prevails. Love knows no limit to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It can outlast anything. It is, in fact, the one thing that still stands when all else has fallen. That's what we need in our marriages. We need to love one another, and that love will enable us to have a marriage that will live as long as we live. Well, do you have any thoughts or comments before we close today? Appreciate the fact that you're here and you've listened well again, and I appreciate it. We plan to have 2 more lessons in this series, then we're going to turn it back over to Scott in this class. 2 more lessons. We hope you'll be with us for those 2 lessons. Thank you.